2 years ago, at this same conference, I also talked about non-orientation, which shows you how far my thinking has come since then. In this 1951 science fiction thriller, a spaceship lands on the Capitol Mall in Washington, D.C. to warn Earth that its recklessness with atomic bombs could destroy the universe. And unless they change their ways, the Federation of Galaxies will destroy them rather than risk universal annihilation. Well, you know where that went. But there is the same topological inversion involved in this film, although it wasn't directly about Asylum. This time we learned that non-orientation wasn't just the inversion of outer space into the center of the Capitol Mall, but a material conversion that came along with a moral twist. The human-like emissary was accompanied by a robot named Gort, who defended his master and the spaceship with a laser-like ray that had the ability to distinguish between good and evil. With uncanny precision, the ray would destroy weapons in the hands of aggressive soldiers surrounding the spaceship, but leave the soldiers unharmed. This binary capability leads us to another feature of extimacy. First, the beam was a direct case of inversion. The power of the stars surrounding Earth was, like the spaceship, brought into a point in the center. But in addition to inversion, we have to recognize a second feature of extimacy, the ability of the cut to make binary choices, to make ethical decisions. This morality feature is what we felt with Edgar Poe's version of extimacy, the idea that the desire for asylum was simultaneously a desire that others without asylum should die, that asylum was a kind of zero-sum game. If the circle around the spaceship was not simply an inversion circle, but a genuine Lacanian rim, which we could think of as a torus, this leads us to consider thinking about it as an induction puzzle, where the rim is basically a frame that makes us think it's one frame, but in fact it's two, and they're slightly offset. An induction puzzle creates a space between two frames that are symmetrically different, where a zero-sum game is played out without the benefit of a middle position. It's like the Cretan liar who tells the truth that he is lying, but then the lie becomes the truth, and on and on. This is the forced choice, where heads I win, tails you lose. At this point, the conversion of the inversion circle into a torus with two voids that we can't decide between makes sense in the scenes that unfold, where there is always an element of the forced choice. In fact, the film is like a blueprint of how extimacy gives way to a comedy of errors, where each type 1 error, the innocent person thrown into prison, is directly linked to the guilty person allowed to roam free. In this case, the innocent guy and the guilty guy are one and the same person, the humanoid Clatu, who can't be contained. Although he seems nice enough, we have to remember that he visits Earth to present a forced choice that will murder everyone on the planet. Hardly a nice guy, but after all, he is not unlike a religious manifestation we are all familiar with, the Archangel Michael who comes to tell us time's up. Clatu's condensation of the powers of life and death as a space angel version of the forced choice opens up another angle on the induction puzzle, which is that the space between the two frames, the heads I win, tails you lose space of the forced choice, is an angle as well as an angel. Maybe it's just the wings and the sword, but in Seminar 13, the object of psychoanalysis, Lacan actually gives us diagrams for the way an object can have the powers of a subject, in the same way a robot can be able to distinguish between good and evil. This early version of ChatGPT is actually more precise. It converts the identity and inversion of the induction puzzle into two perspectival qualities dilation, and cathesis. Dilation is the constancy of the cone of vision, where the profile of any object is a perfect mask for the space made invisible behind it, and where the limits of vision always move along with the eye that is the apex of this cone of vision. The two errors in the material sentence are cut away from the truth claim, but then the materiality becomes the truth, and the truth is materialized. This is why ChatGPT finds it so easy to be your friend. Lacan seems to have thought about this, even at the point of Seminar 3, the psychoses. He makes a wireframe of the L schema to be both about space and time, with a perspective hinge at a point where the unconscious crosses over the imaginary of the blah 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 to reach the perfect shadow of the S, the unbarred S, whose horizon has been lifted to the level of the analyst from the ground of the unconscious. By the time of Seminar 13, the object of psychoanalysis, Lacan has extended his idea of the perspective hinge as the inversion and induction of the analyst's extromissive view of the subject's pre-subjective core, the look behind her eyes, so to speak. The hinge is the acousmatic la langue of the analysand's blah blah blah, which forms a perfect shadow within the cone established by the analyst, thanks to the palindrome of the visual lines that are the look of the scopic drive and the gaze of the unconscious. The perspective hinge is what allows the visual imaginary to convert synesthetically to the acousmatic dilation of the slips of the tongue and bungled explanations into the tempo variations introduced by the analyst. The material cause becomes the effective cause of analysis, the construction of truth as an event of the unconscious. This is what Lacan meant, I think, when he said that Aristotle had bungled the case for material cause, and what Zizek meant also, I think, when he called for a fifth cause to deal with inversions such as virtual reality into reality of the virtual. We need a cause specific to the truth that is the truth of analysis, which is simultaneously the unconscious of the analysand. Others seem to have thought about this already. With the collapse of the wireframe of the L schema to the point of a nearly flat palindrome, artists such as Saul Steinberg have their own versions of the induction puzzle, with drawings that put themselves inside and pull our looking inside to be looked at. Or Alberto Giacometti's anorexic figures who eat less so that the big other that is space can eat more. The big A is not for Alberto, but the big other that is this hunger of space that makes the perspective hinge into a palindromic banquet, visible and invisible, consumer and consumed, speaker and the spoken. This may be what Lacan meant when he used the latter as the unary of phonemic language, an irreducible remainder, the letter that always arrives at its destination, because it follows the rules of the induction puzzle and uses the frame as a mailbox. The frame is where the letter says, "Hello, I must be going." I thought of explaining the palindrome's production of the unary trait with the example taken from a story about the mathematical genius Carl Friedrich Gauss. When he was a young kid, his schoolmaster assigned the class to add up all the numbers from 1 to 100. Gauss realized that, since the numbers would all have to be added in pairs, he could arrange them so that one number would eat up the other number, so to speak. By folding the numbers over onto each other to produce a palindrome, All Gauss had to do was count the unaries and multiply the sum. I've used 20 here to save time, but you see the pattern. The new idea is that Gauss's fold allows the unary to flow from one end of the sequence to the other. So I would like to add the idea of viscosity to talk about the palindrome as what we would call a unary flow, and always think of the unary as a kind of perfect breathing exercise. This makes it easier to understand how analysis involves la langue, which is the magic breath inside language that the analyst strives to squeeze and stretch. Just remember, on behalf of the induction puzzle, that this squeezing and stretching is guided by the presence of error. 2 errors that are really 3. If the L schema is a collapsible drying rack, then we have a new way of thinking about Lacanian psychoanalysis. It's the acousmatic, the auditory, the anamorphic, with a projective hinge that uses prohibition, such as Alice's mirror, to reach the wonderland of the unconscious. If dilation is a kind of regulatory mechanism holding the visible and invisible in place, and if cathesis is the principle of portability, connecting opposites such as near and far, high and low, inside and outside, we can say that the unconscious is antipodal to the knowledge of the analyst, and that this antipodal relationship makes calling it a science make more sense. There are traditional terms in psychoanalysis that we normally treat one by one, but if we see them as an array spread out as symptom, time, and spatial extension, new roles for perspective and the synthome pull the palindromic hinge and breath-related la langue into focus. The unary one then becomes the lead actor in our new feature film about how extension is really viscosity, a stickiness that is the rule held in place by the free association of random particulars. And because artists are masters of free-ranging particulars, we can look to key moments where their versions of viscosity, anamorphosis, and la langue all come together with an inductive use of the inside frame. I cannot think of a better case than Antonello da Messina's painting of St. Jerome in his study, where there is a double frame, one for us to look through, a second one for God, as we both watch Jerome working on the Vulgate Bible. There is, if you look closely at the objects placed between the 2 frames, a bowl and 2 birds. The bowl and peacock are no mistakes. They belong to the iconography of heaven. The partridge, however, is an error on several counts. Medieval bestiaries tell us that it is a bird so sex-obsessed that it can be impregnated by the wind. This is our key. We are inside the induction puzzle. For thanks to the partridge, whose Latin name is Perdix, the same as the nephew of the first architect Daedalus, whom Daedalus killed because he was the real inventor of the Thesean labyrinth, we know that impregnating breath is what makes Jerome pregnant with the breath of God. At this point, words are no longer blah 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 to be translated. They are Lacanian signifiers. They speak the speaker. Possibly this is why the Bible is the single greatest source of chiastic constructions. The unary path of the Thesean labyrinth shows how viscosity is simultaneously one thing and a palindrome alternating between moving inside and outside, a perfect accordion of contraction and expansion that duplicates the analytical session. It doesn't hurt our case that Perdix, after being thrown off a cliff by his jealous uncle, from that time on flew close to the earth, a metonymic one-to-one correspondence of signifier and signified, a perfect viscosity that was still a flight, a signifier, just as Lacan put it, above the ground of the signified. All this is to say, Hooray for the unary, which is in no way to celebrate any one thing, but rather to say that the one is always in motion, a back and forth between the two frames, air and earth, metaphor and metonymy. Once is the no thing, the prohibition. We should remember, in this age of brutal expulsions, the stickiness of the unary, the fact that what endures the suffering of exile will return to the destination that was the first induction puzzle, the fruit not to be eaten. How clever of the authors of Genesis to think of a snake as the mascot of the unary. Put two of them together, and you get what Tiresias saw that allowed him to escape the binary of sexuation and see all that could be seen.